The situation between India and Pakistan has been escalating by the day. And this has sent concerns not just in the subcontinent, but across the world. What happens next, and what does this escalating conflict between India and Pakistan mean for the world? Today I'm joined by one of the world's leading global commentators, Fareed Zakaria, hosts CNN's GPS show, columnist at the Washington Post, and a friend of ours. Thank you very much, Fareed Zakaria, for joining us in this very difficult moment. Two nuclear neighbors engaged in an escalating conflict. What does this mean, Fareed, for the world?
Well, it is always dangerous when you have two nuclear neighbors involved in this kind of tension. It's particularly worrying because this one does not seem to follow the pattern that you have seen really for the last 25 years. Ever since both India and Pakistan developed nuclear capacity, nuclear weapons capacity, there has been a tendency to have managed escalation and managed de-escalation, where both sides realize that there are dangers here of escalating and that it could get out of hand. And so there's always been a somewhat choreographed process by which these hostilities are managed. That does not appear to be happening here. And what worries me greatly is that in this environment, you could easily imagine a miscalculation, a misperception, a stray drone, a stray missile hitting, targets it was not intended to. And there do not seem to be mechanisms to be able to bring this down and bring this, to land this plane in a way that causes minimal harm, both to India and Pakistan, but to the broader environment.
I'll come to the ways in which this can be calmed down or de-escalated, but the fact is nuclear deterrence has held firm for more than 2 decades between India and Pakistan. But how long can that alone sustain it, Fareed, is the question, because you've got India now claiming that, look, this escalation was brought upon us by Pakistan and Pak-based terrorists who attacked innocent tourists in Pahalgam. That's where this started a couple of weeks ago. And the Indian position is very clear. We are going to retaliate this time, targeted attacks on terror infrastructure. Do you believe that's a position that India has the moral high ground to take this time?
Look, I do. I think that let's step back, though, and ask ourselves, what is the likely cause? What is the likely broader issue here that has animated this? Clearly, these moves emanated out of, from Pakistani-sponsored militias, whether directly or not. I think what is going on is you have a crisis of legitimacy in Pakistan. Let us be clear. Pakistan's most popular politician is in jail. The people who are responsible for putting him there, the Pakistani military, are deeply unpopular. Perhaps for the first time in a long time in Pakistani history, the Pakistani military does not have the kind of easy legitimacy that they've had. So one wonders whether part of these hostilities have been part of an effort to rally the Pakistani nation behind the government and in particular the military. Certainly the chief of army staff's comments 5 days before the attacks or a few days before the attacks would lend credence to this view. So what you have is a fundamental problem politically in Pakistan that might have erupted, and now India has to manage it. The fact that India may have the moral high ground does not absolve it, however, of maintaining the strategic high ground of trying to calm the situation. At the end of the day, India has the moral high ground, but it has the most to lose from a massive escalation here. Pakistan, if I can be honest, is already a basket case economy. There's not much, there's not much further to fall. India, on the other hand, is on a high growth trajectory right now. Peace and prosperity are very important to it. So it has the moral high ground. Let it take the strategic high ground as well.
But even if we want to take the strategic high ground, India has made it more than clear on more than one occasion in the last few days, Fareed, that India's attacks are measured, focused, and are essentially not seeking to escalate. But the fact is the Pakistani military establishment, the army state, seems to be wanting an escalating conflict. You've heard General Asif Munir a few weeks ago saying Hindus and Muslims can't coexist, the two-nation theory is still alive, Kashmir is the jugular vein. So you've got a military leadership in Pakistan that seems to be itching to broaden this conflict for whatever reason.
I think you're right, and that's why I pointed to this. This seems to emanate out of a desire in Pakistan to rally the country around the military. The challenge still remains. India has a lot to lose from this spiraling out of control. So, is there a way for it to be the more responsible party, to be to find a way to manage this down? If this blows up, nobody is going to care whose fault it was. It's like, imagine one of these massive, traffic accidents. At the end of the day, there's going to be a huge amount of collateral damage. And as I say, India is the country that will bear the greatest cost, because it will derail India from what is otherwise a very, very powerful growth trajectory. In fact, look, India was poised to perhaps become the alternative to China as a manufacturing powerhouse. So all kinds of good things happening here. All I'm saying is, let's not forget that that's the goal. That the goal is to raise the living standards of Indians.
But how does India de-escalate when your neighbor seems to be constantly provoking? Even as you and I speak now, there have been more drone attacks from across the border. So it almost seems as if the enemy state on the other side, or Pakistan, is pushing India into an escalating spiral. How do you de-escalate when one side seems determined to escalate it further?
Part of the challenge here is that we have lost the United States as a kind of useful intermediary, as a country that could talk to both sides and try to manage this de-escalation down, so that you communicate to both sides, you calm them down. You saw Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, lean into that kind of role initially, and that seemed to represent the traditional American role that the United States has played for the last several decades, every time one of these things has happened. But then a few hours later, J.D. Vance, the vice president, essentially washes his hands off the whole situation and says the U.S. doesn't want to get involved. So there you see the tension in America between the old traditional engaged superpower and the now more isolationist wing of the Republican Party in Vance, saying, we're washing our hands of this, do whatever you want. So because of that, you don't have a party that's trusted. And frankly, the US is now less trusted by Pakistan than it was 10 or 15 years ago. The Pakistanis believe the US has become entirely pro-Indian. So you have a problem. Normally in these situations, what is helpful is an intermediary, someone who can speak to both sides. And that doesn't exist right now.
You see, that is precisely the problem, Fareed, that you've struck at. The Trump administration, the impression we get in India, doesn't want to get deeply involved. I remember during Kargil, President Bill Clinton actually made a serious effort and eventually succeeded in brokering a peace. For Donald Trump, is the region not important? Is he too preoccupied with other issues? We heard the State Department spokesperson saying, yes, we all stand up against terror, but we want this tit-for-tat retaliatory action to stop, almost once again hyphenating India and Pakistan. Is the Trump administration conscious of Indian sensibilities? And is it a top priority for this administration, given that it's got issues both domestically and with the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into the statements being put out by the State Department and by the Trump administration, because frankly, I think they're just not that interested in the world. It is a kind of Fortress America mentality, which says whatever's going on outside, let it happen. We don't really care very much. And the danger here is that this is a place where the United States has very effectively used its diplomatic and moral authority to calm tensions down. I think, I hope this is not the case, but this may be the new world we're in, a world without a superpower, a world without a country that tries to manage these tensions. And these local conflicts can therefore spiral. And that is the danger here very clearly.
So, given what you're saying, that the United States seems reluctant, dare I say, to play some kind of a global policeman, certainly in the context of South Asia, who does India turn to? Because India has made it very clear in the past, we are not going to allow Pakistan to internationalize Kashmir, which has been an attempt made by the Pakistanis from time to time. Who does India turn to try and rein in the Pakistani military leadership from doing the kind of misadventure or miscalculation that you spoke about earlier?
Well, you ask a very good question. If they're with, this is a kind of broader question for the world in a way, because if you don't have the United States, who do you have? As you say, India is not going to trust. I mean, what are the options? The UN, India has a long history of not wanting the UN involved in this. China, certainly the Chinese have influence with Pakistan, but India would not trust China as a intermediary at all. The European Union, they're just too, they're not really a single entity. They don't have powerful geopolitical, geomilitary presence. So this is the post-American world that I worried about. You are seeing it in South Asia. And what it means is dangers of conflict spiraling out of control. I return to the reality. India is the bigger, the more powerful, the richer country, and it has the most to lose. So I'm hoping in some way India has the capacity. And you are right, Rajdeep. India is trying to signal a more measured approach. And you have to hope that at some point that Pakistan realizes that this is not a conflict they can win.
The other issue that this Indian leadership, Narendra Modi's leadership, says, look, we are not going to adopt a doctrine of strategic restraint of the kind that we saw when Mr. Vajpayee was Prime Minister, or Manmohan Singh. You saw what happened after 26/11 in Mumbai. India adopted a policy by and large of strategic interest while trying to diplomatically isolate Pakistan. India under Modi, Uri, then Balakot, now in Pahalgam, has gone up an escalatory ladder saying we'll give kinetic action. Enough is enough when it comes to park-based terror. Is that a dangerous approach at one level to take, or the right approach to take? Because how do you then stop the terror emanating out of Pakistan?
Look, this has been the problem for 50 years, as you know, Rajdeep. The Pakistani military has played this game of encouraging an ecosystem of militant groups and jihadis, some of which it controls, some of which it may not control, but it's spawned a whole world of terror and militancy. Now, how do you put the genie back in the bottle? The worry I have is that if you find it, I understand the logic behind hitting hard and all that. The danger is these things can spiral out of control. It's very easy to start a war. It is very hard to stop it. Think about all, the US in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Think of the Israelis now in Gaza, where they have been saying, where they perfectly understandably had the moral justification to hit back after the October 7th attack. But it's now been a year and a half. They keep, it's easy to start these things. It's very hard then to in some way wind them down.
But do you believe that kinetic action is the way to take on cross-border terrorism? As I said, in the past, India has tried various, India has been willing to adopt a policy of strategic restraint in the hope that Pakistan will see sense. But this jihadi factory continues to strike every now and then. So, I mean, given an option, are you saying that strategic restraint is still preferable even in the times that we live in? There's, as you said, there's the Israeli approach that's taken, that we're going to give them back as good as we get. And the Indian approach now under Prime Minister Modi seems to be taking us up an escalatory ladder without a sense of certainty as to what lies ahead. I think it's the uncertainty which is troubling. Is that, once again, Fareed, the right way to go?
See, what I worry about, Rajdeep, is yes, you can hit back, and I think in the short term, it is understandable. But then what is the longer term strategy, right? India has tried various approaches like this in the past. In the long run, the only strategy that seems to me to make sense is, yes, have deterrence, hit back hard, demonstrate that you can punch back as hard as you get punched, maybe even more. But then you need some diplomatic channels, some political process to
Mhm.
reach some kind of strategic understanding with Pakistan. And what I would say is that's the area where I think India could do more. It is again because India is the bigger, the stronger, the richer party. Ultimately, you're only going to solve this with some kind of political dialogue and arrangement with Pakistan. It's not going to happen now. In the heat of this tension, in the heat of these Pakistani attacks, of course, there's going to be the Indians are going to strike back, and it's understandable. But my point is, in the long run,
Mhm.
is that the best way to solve this problem, or is there a path forward? And look, there's always been this fundamental problem. Pakistan needs this for the Pakistani military to play the central role in Pakistan's society. That is the fundamental problem. That if I truly believe that what Imran Khan was doing was by
Mhm.
threatening the supremacy of the Pakistani military, he could have taken the country down a road where you could imagine a very different situation. But the
You
way
know,
Pakistan is governed, with the military
mm,
at the heart of it, they need this conflict. So
you know,
that is the challenge.
because it's often said, Fareed, that every country has an army. In Pakistan, the army has a country. And this has been a problem that Pakistan has had to wrestle with over the last 75 years, since 47, long periods where the army has completely dictated terms to the civilian leadership. Is that the fundamental skewed nature of Pakistan? Some call it a failed state, others call it a dysfunctional state. How would you see Pakistan today?
I think it's actually been described best by a Pakistani, Hussein Haqqani, who talked about the basically the reality of modern Pakistan in the last 40 years after Zia-ul Haq is that the Pakistani military realized that in order to bolster its legitimacy, it needed to ally with very extreme parts of the Islamic fundamentalist movement, very militant parts. And that Faustian bargain is at the heart of the rot that has been created, because it has created a kind of Frankenstein's monster that it sometimes controls, sometimes cannot control. And they've never found a way to dial back from that. And so that's the heart of the problem. And I do have a lot of sympathy, therefore, with people who say that India just needs to keep deterrence up, just keep, push back. The exact amount you have to push back, we could argue about, because I don't want this to escalate. But I do think it is important to search for some kind of political, process that can at least, for example, in moments of crisis like this, where there would be a channel or a hotline or something like that. To me, what is so sad about the situation and so dangerous is not only are the two countries whipping themselves up into a nationalist fervor, there's very little communication, not just at the top between the leadership, not even at the military for miscommunication, but even the two media ecosystems of the two countries exist now in kind of two hermetically sealed systems. They know almost nothing about what's going on, the whole, which makes it all the more dangerous.
That's brilliantly put there, Fareed. I want to come to another aspect to it, which is China. You've mentioned already in the show so far on three different occasions, India emerging as this strong economy, possibly as China plus one, as an alternate to China for manufacturing and supply links. At a moment like this, China, which has often seen Pakistan as an ally, some would call it almost as a vassal state of China. Do you believe that the Chinese are playing also a dangerous game here, allowing this instability to perpetuate? Maybe, dare one say, and there's been speculation, goading Pakistan into this escalating conflict with India?
Yes, look, and I don't think it's strategically wise for the Chinese. Frankly, if the Chinese were to be more strategically enlightened about this, they would try to play the role of an honest broker. They would rein in the Pakistanis. They would use the enormous influence they have with Pakistan, and that would earn them some credibility with India. If the Chinese really want to think about playing a clever game here, the way to deal with the challenge from America would be to improve ties with India. to improve the relationship between India and China. In fact, they have fallen into an old pattern as far as I can see. Pakistan is essentially, I don't know, I'd call it a vassal state, but it's deeply dependent on China. And the military has become even more dependent as they worry about the fact that they're going to lose America as their great weapon supplier. That is what the Pakistani military believes, that India will essentially become the American military power of choice. They will lose out, so they've moved to China. But from the Chinese point of view, I think it's a miscalculation. But Xi Jinping has made many bad foreign policy moves. This is just one of them.
India also, Fareed, in the last couple of weeks has looked at other ways in which to put pressure on Pakistan. There's diplomatic pressure. There's also the major move taken of holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, seeing water as a weapon. Do you believe, therefore, in today's world, we need to look at other ways in which countries are put under pressure to fall in line? The world talks about zero tolerance against terror, but when it comes to Pak-based terror, it seems to have allowed Pakistan to get away with impunity for too long. Do you believe, therefore, weapons like water work? And why does the world, if I may ask that, not take Pak-based terror with the same seriousness as it would as terror directed against the Western world?
First, the Indus waters issue. I think you're exactly right. This is and this is new, as you know, Rajdeep. India has not done this in the past, and it signals, I think, how seriously it takes this. I do believe that is the kind of thing that India should do to try to signal the seriousness of this situation, and also as a way to, eventually have some carrots on the table that it can provide were there to be some kind of political process by which you can in some way stabilize the situation. Uh, Look, as far as the way in which the world treats this, to be fair, the world generally has recognized that this is terrorism, that it does seem to have links to Pakistan. Uh, I would put it this way: the world doesn't like to get involved in this. That's different from saying the world is tolerating it. The world sees this as a messy situation between these two very powerful nationalistic countries. And, J.D. Vance's approach is probably speaks for a lot of people, which is we just don't want to get involved. It's an unfortunate approach because the US has always been the country that could diffuse the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, people look at this and say, we're going to just take two steps back and let the Indians and Pakistanis handle this.
The reason I came to the double standards about terror, it was very interesting when the Pakistani defense minister was interviewed on Sky News about questions about Pakistan sponsoring terror. What does he say? Look, we've been doing the dirty work for the United States and various Western nations, including Britain, for the last several decades, virtually pointing out that post the Afghan war in the late 70s, Pakistan became, in a sense, the epicenter of terror. And that's the concern. And that terror has not just been restricted now to attacks on India. Pakistan also has got caught up in this entire terror cycle. So you see, the Western world, Pakistan argues, used us in Afghanistan, and now therefore has no moral right in a way to tell us how to deal with the jihadi factories.
Well, I saw that interview, Rajdeep, and it illustrates precisely the problem, which is that there is still elements in the Pakistani military that believe that in fighting Islamic jihadi groups, the Pakistani military, were doing America a favor, rather than recognizing that by fighting these these jihadi groups, whom they have funded and encouraged and spawned for 50, 70 years, they were saving their own country. And that what they really need to do is to do more of that and to dismantle these groups so that not only do they not pose a threat to India, they don't pose a threat to Pakistan and to the viability of a normal, stable, democratic country. I mean, the idea that the Pakistani military thinks that, the only reason they should be getting rid of crazy, nihilistic, religiously, millenarian terrorists is as a favor to the West is mind-boggling. So what you would like a society in which which these people are teeming all over the place? And by the way, he may have forgotten they've caused the deaths of tens of thousands of Pakistanis along the way, and they don't regard the Pakistani military as some great avatar, of virtue. The whole thing, to me, reflected the problem in Pakistan, which is they don't get the idea that having this jihadi, fifth column or whatever you want to call it, is actually bad for Pakistan. It's not. It's not. It's. They should save their own country.
Perhaps also ensures the relevance of the Pakistan army. But Fareed, as we come to the end, I just want a couple of more quick questions. One, in Pahalgam, what worried people was that there was a religious profiling. People were killed after being asked their religion. And this, was perhaps a deliberate attempt by the jihadi factory and their sponsors in Pakistan to stoke a Hindu-Muslim divide in India. Fortunately, India has united. But is that a fear that you have, that somewhere down the line, this is another attempt by Pakistan to stir this Hindu-Muslim divide, all the more for India's political leadership to ensure religious harmony above all else?
Look, I worry about it, but Rajdeep, I think it's fair to say that Indian Muslims have now been tested for 75 years on these issues. And really, there's very little sympathy as far as I can tell, in the Indian Muslim community for Pakistani terror, for Pakistani jihadists. And time and again, people worry, and in fact, there is virtually no support. I mean, look at and it's not just Pakistani terror. Islamic militancy in general. I mean, India has whatever it is, 150 million Muslims, and look around in the Islamic terror groups of the world, of South Asia. There are virtually no Indian Muslim members. Indian Muslims have been loyal to the country from 1947, and I think this is one more demonstration of that.
My final question to Fareed, what for you is the worst case scenario of this conflict? What's the best case?
Worst case scenario is definitely that it could spiral into a larger war. There is a very real danger here because both sides are locked into a situation where they seem to be unable to find a way to climb down. That is exactly what causes countries to kind of sleepwalk into war. And when I sleepwalk, I mean nobody wants a wider war, but they can't see how they can back down. And that places both of them in a position where the only option is escalate, escalate, escalate. The best case scenario at this point is still that there is somehow this can turn into a descending spiral of violence rather than an ascending spiral of violence. In other words, each counterattack can become less pronounced than the next one. So that we're looking at this, Rajdeep, 2 or 3 days from now, and we notice, yes, there's a drone attack here, but the incidence, the centrality is going down rather than up. And if that happens, it can wind itself down. It would be very helpful for the United States to get involved. But unfortunately, at this point, it looks like this is going to be more a case of self-management rather than, Washington managing it.
But you're not ruling out the possibility of Washington playing some kind of a role in the coming days. I mean, it's not as if Washington cannot play a role at the moment.
Look, I hope very much it does. And, yes, with the Trump administration, the beauty of this administration is it can reverse itself on a dime. If somebody, as Trump is walking to the helicopter, says, don't you think you should be involved more in the India-Pakistan thing? And he says, yes, absolutely. Suddenly the whole administration will turn on a dime and say, that's exactly what we meant to do. Let's call it in a constructive manner, there is enormous flexibility in Washington these days. What was black yesterday can be white tomorrow. So let's hope he changes his mind.
And if you were to give one piece of advice, if Narendra Modi ji or someone in the Indian establishment were to call you tonight and say, Fareed, what should we do next? What would you tell them?
Keep your eye on the prize. India is in a great trajectory. Peace and prosperity will take hundreds of millions of Indians out of poverty. Don't forget, that is the prize.
Okay. Fareed Zakaria, as always, I appreciate you joining us and speaking to us with such clarity and giving us a global perspective to what's been happening here in the subcontinent. Stay well, and thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Rajdeep.